The
The
efficacy
elevator
data from the
doors
trials
glided open with
confirms
a
our
soft
hypothesis,
chime, and
particularly in
Maya
this
Ellis
subset.
stepped
So we are
inside,
clear to
clutching her
proceed with the next
laptop bag
stage.
against her
Yes,
chest.
absolutely.
She inhaled slowly, wishing, hoping, that today would not be another day that tested the limits of her sanity. But the world had a strange sense of humor, especially when Maya was trying her best to stay calm. This was her first day at Lunaris Global Innovations, the tech consulting firm that had recruited her aggressively for months. It was everything she had worked for: prestigious, competitive, intellectually intense. The type of company that demanded brilliance the way lungs demanded air. Exactly her type of environment. Or at least it used to be. Before life had taught her that ambition came with teeth. Before she learned that the higher you climbed, the lonelier it became. Before the one person who used to ignite her competitive fire suddenly turned into something she couldn't define or forget. The elevator stopped at the 35th floor. The doors opened, and a group of employees stepped in. Maya shifted politely, squeezing to the corner. "There's a new senior strategist starting today," one woman whispered. "Another prodigy. Apparently she beat every internal candidate. Poor thing, she has no idea what this place is really like." Maya stared straight ahead, pretending not to hear. This was her chance. A fresh start. A chapter free from the shadows of her past. The elevator climbed again. Ding, 36th floor. Ding, 37th floor. Her heart beat faster. Floor 42, the executive strategy floor, was where she'd be working. The doors closed again, and for a brief second, Maya allowed herself to smile. This time, she wouldn't break. This time, she wouldn't let anyone crush her confidence. She had survived worse. But then the elevator stopped with a sudden mechanical jolt, throwing everyone slightly off balance. A man groaned, "Not again." Another sighed, "This building needs a full system overhaul." But the panel blinked once, twice, and then resumed moving. "Thank God," a woman murmured, clutching her coffee. Maya exhaled as the tension in her shoulders slowly eased. The elevator continued climbing, finally reaching her floor. Ding, 42. She stepped out. Her new beginning. The floor was designed with glass walls, marble accents, and bright open spaces. It radiated prestige and power, the kind of place that rewarded excellence and punished mediocrity mercilessly. She walked toward the reception area, where a tall woman in a gray blazer smiled warmly. "Maya Ellis." "Yes." "Welcome to Lunaris. The director is expecting you." Maya followed her down a long hallway lined with framed patents and global awards. As they approached the final door at the end, the receptionist knocked lightly. "Sir, the new strategist is here." "Send her in." The voice was deep, smooth, and painfully familiar. Too familiar. The type of voice she used to hear across debate halls, in student project rooms, in the library where they argued over case studies. The type of voice that had once made her heart race. The type of voice that had also once shattered her confidence so thoroughly that she'd avoided her university's business department for months. Her skin prickled. No, no, it couldn't be. The receptionist opened the door. Maya stepped inside and froze. Sitting behind the large glass desk, sleeves slightly rolled, pen resting between his fingers, was Adrian Hale. Her rival, her intellectual equal, her biggest competitor, her undoing, and the last person on earth she ever expected to see again. He looked up, and the pen slipped from his hand. "Maya." Her throat tightened. "Adrian." For a moment, the world stilled. He stood, slower than she remembered him moving, as if unsure whether she was real. She forced herself to maintain a neutral expression. Not angry, not nervous, not affected, even though her pulse hammered with memories she wished she could bury forever. He finally spoke. You're the new senior strategist." "Yes." "Here at Lunaris." Her jaw clenched, clearly. Wow," he blinked, and that unreadable expression she remembered too well flickered across his eyes. Confusion. Shock. Regret. She looked away before she could analyze it. Let's get started, Maya said, stepping farther into the office. But Adrian raised a hand. Maya, can we talk before the orientation begins? No. Her answer was immediate and sharp. We have nothing to talk about. A muscle twitched in his jaw. He looked almost hurt. Almost. But she didn't care. Not anymore. Not after everything that happened between them. Right, Adrian cleared his throat, straightening. Then let's begin the briefing. He reached for a folder on his desk. But the moment he touched it, a loud alarm blared. The overhead lights flickered red. A message flashed on the office screen. Emergency lockdown activated. Floor 42, sealed for security protocol. What? Maya stepped back. What does that mean? Adrian's expression darkened as he tapped the touchscreen embedded in his desk. This can't be right. There's no drill scheduled. He tried again. Nothing responded. The lights dimmed, then brightened again. Finally, he looked up. Maya, the doors on this floor just locked. Her pulse accelerated. All the doors, she whispered. He nodded slowly. Including mine. A quiet, sinking dread filled the room. They were alone. Trapped. Her. Adrian. In his office. Together. For however long the system took to restart. Her heart thudded painfully. No. No, no, no. Not with him. Not after years of silence. Not after what he had done. Not after how deeply he had hurt her in college, without ever knowing the damage he caused. Adrian took a careful step toward her. Maya, I know you don't want to talk, but we might be stuck here for a while. She backed away until her spine hit the glass wall. I said we have nothing to talk about. And I'm saying, he exhaled heavily, rubbing his forehead. I've been waiting 8 years to talk to you. Her stomach dropped. She stared at him, stunned. I don't owe you anything. No, his voice softened. You don't, but I owe you everything. She swallowed hard, ignoring the sting behind her eyes. Adrian, stop. But he didn't. You think I don't remember? His voice trembled slightly. You think I forgot how things ended between us, how I crushed you without meaning to, how that last competition. Don't, she whispered. Her past was a scar she kept hidden. A scar he had carved. Adrian's eyes held a depth she had never seen before. Remorse, sincerity, something aching and unspoken. I'm not here to hurt you again, he said quietly. I just want a chance to explain. She forced a cold laugh. Explain after 8 years, after everything that happened. You want to explain now because we're locked in the same room. He winced. Maya, please, you deserve the truth. I don't want your truth, she snapped. She turned her back to him, staring at the sealed glass door and wishing it would somehow open. Behind her, she heard Adrian inhale slowly. Maya. She closed her eyes. It was too much. Too sudden. Too painful. Being trapped with him. The one person who once challenged her, inspired her, competed with her, and unknowingly destroyed her. It felt like a cruel joke. And she had no escape. Not until the lockdown ended. Not until the building system rebooted. Not until she faced the past she had spent years running from. And Adrian Hale, her rival, her shadow, her unfinished story, was now standing only a few feet away. And neither of them could leave. For a long moment, silence stretched inside the office, thick enough to feel like gravity itself was pressing down on both of them. The red emergency lights washed the room in a muted glow, reflecting off the glass walls like ripples of heat. Maya tried to steady her breathing, but her chest felt too tight. As if all the air had been vacuumed out the moment she walked into this room and saw Adrian standing there. She had spent years building walls brick by brick. Discipline, focus, accomplishments, distance. And now all of them felt like they were shaking, threatening to collapse under the weight of memories she had buried so deeply she thought they had dissolved. She hated the way her body reacted to being in the same room with him, hated that her pulse raced without her permission, hated that even after everything, some part of her recognized the rhythm of his voice. the sincerity in his confusion, the unresolved history that still pulsed like an old bruise beneath her skin. Adrian slowly paced toward the locked office door, testing the handle even though he had already tried twice. It didn't budge. His hand lingered there for a moment before he pulled away with a frustrated sigh. He turned back toward Maya with a seriousness she had never seen on him in their university years, where he wore confidence like armor and carried victory like destiny. "The system says the lockdown was triggered by a false alarm," he said eventually. "Maybe a sensor malfunction. But it means the fire doors, the hallway barriers, even the elevator access, everything is sealed. The last time this happened, it took maintenance nearly 2 hours to override it." His voice was calm, but Maya sensed the tension simmering beneath the surface. She straightened her shoulders even as anxiety fluttered inside her. "So we're really trapped." "For a while," he admitted. Her eyes scanned the office, wide but enclosed, with floor-to-ceiling glass walls that showed the hallway, the conference room across from them, the empty desks beyond. The entire floor looked deserted now, evacuated by the alarm. Only she and Adrian remained in this silent, suspended world above the city. She rubbed her arms, trying to dispel the uneasy chill riding up her spine. 8 years. 8 long years of pretending she had made peace with the past. 8 years of believing she had freed herself from the bitterness of that final year in college. But the truth was standing only a few steps away, staring at her like a man trying to solve a puzzle he regretted ever creating. Adrian approached the center of the room, hesitating before he spoke again. "Maya, I didn't expect our reunion to be like this. I didn't even know Lunaris hired you. If I had known—" He stopped himself, jaw tightening. "If you had known what?" Maya asked sharply. "You would have blocked my application." There was more accusation in her voice than she intended, but she didn't take it back. His eyes widened. "No, never. If anything, I would have prepared myself." He ran a hand through his hair, an old nervous habit she unfortunately remembered all too clearly. "Back then we competed because we were both afraid of being seen as anything less than perfect. But I was worse. I pushed too hard. I said things I shouldn't have. I hurt you without understanding how deeply." His fingers curled into fists. "I've regretted it for a long time." Maya crossed her arms, partly to protect herself from the emotions stirring inside and partly because she didn't trust her voice. Adrian Hale had been the one person who could match her in ambition, intelligence, and strategy. They were 2 rising stars destined to outshine everyone else. Their rivalries were legendary. Their debates went on for hours, professors watching amused as the 2 of them tore apart case studies with the kind of ferocity usually reserved for political battlegrounds. But rivalry had a way of transforming into something else. Admiration, tension, something too intense for either of them to acknowledge back then. And that intensity had cost her everything during their final competition. "Regret doesn't erase consequences," she finally said. "You didn't just hurt me, Adrian. You humiliated me. You blindsided me in front of the entire judging panel, and you didn't even give me a chance to defend myself. You acted as if being right mattered more than being human." Her voice trembled at the edges, a mixture of old grief and new anger. He exhaled deeply, closing his eyes for a moment. "I know." "No, you don't," she said, shaking her head slowly. "You don't know how that moment followed me everywhere I went, how every interview I attended felt like a reminder that maybe I wasn't as good as I thought, how every time I wanted to speak up in a room, that memory would replay like a warning that if I dared to shine, someone stronger would destroy me again." Her throat tightened, threatening to trap her words. "You don't know how hard I've fought to rebuild my confidence, to stand on my own, to feel worthy of the opportunities I earned." Adrian looked stricken, truly stricken, as if each sentence struck him like a physical blow. He stepped closer, instinctively, not aggressively, and Maya tensed immediately. He froze, catching the signal instantly, and took a careful step back. He swallowed hard. "Maya, I had no idea. I swear I was young and competitive and stupid, but I didn't understand the impact. I thought you were unstoppable. You always seemed so strong, so composed. I thought you would outdebate me every time. I thought you didn't need my respect, because you already owned the room." Her eyebrows lifted in disbelief. "That's your excuse." "No," he said quietly. "That's my failure." The office fell silent again, but this time it wasn't hostile. It was heavy with unspoken truths, with the gravity of past wounds finally exposed to the light. Maya walked to the window, staring down at the city stretching endlessly below. Cars moved like sparks of light, people like small fleeting shadows. Even from this height, life was going on, unaware that on the 42nd floor of a towering building, 2 people were confronting years of unresolved pain they had carried like invisible armor. You were my biggest rival, she said after a long pause, not turning around. But you were also the only person who ever challenged me in a way that made me feel alive. That made me want to be better. That scared me sometimes because I didn't know whether I wanted to beat you or understand you. She closed her eyes. That confusion cost me. Adrian took a slow breath. You weren't the only one confused. The admission hit her harder than she expected. She turned slightly, seeing him leaning against the edge of his desk, the red emergency lights reflecting in his eyes. There was no arrogance there, no superiority, only a man trying desperately to make sense of a past he never had the courage to face. I need you to know something, he said softly. That final debate, the one where I blindsided you, I didn't plan to humiliate you. I panicked. The panel asked a question I wasn't prepared for, and I reacted defensively. I brought up your previous research to counter you because I knew it was the only way to win. But the moment I saw your face, his voice cracked. I knew I had crossed a line I could never uncross. Maya didn't respond at first. She simply breathed, letting his words sink in, letting the truth soften something small inside her, even if she didn't want it to. Her voice came out quieter now, but steadier. It doesn't erase what happened. I know, he whispered. Star Part 1, Section C. The final section of Part 1, long, deep, connected paragraphs. The emergency lights flickered again, and a soft, automated voice announced that security teams were investigating the system fault. The message echoed faintly through the hallway beyond the glass walls. Maya leaned her forehead against the window, trying to let the coolness steady her rising emotions. She never wanted this confrontation, not like this, not here, not on her first day at a company that was supposed to represent her fresh start. But maybe fate had decided it was time for closure, real closure, not the kind she tried to pretend she had when she left university behind. Adrian approached slowly, keeping a respectful distance this time. His voice was gentler when he spoke again. Maya, I understand that you don't trust me and you have every reason not to, but I want you to know something important. The moment you walked into this room today, I felt something I haven't felt in years, something sharp and familiar. You bring out a part of me I thought I had lost, the part that cared about more than winning. The part that admired someone who was just as passionate, just as stubborn, just as brilliant. She didn't turn, but her heart betrayed her, thudding harder at his words. She hated that he still had the power to affect her, hated that some part of her had always wondered what could have happened if things had been different. If their rivalry hadn't overshadowed everything else, if he hadn't hurt her, if she hadn't walked away without giving him a chance to explain. But those were old fantasies from a younger version of herself, one who didn't yet understand how competitive environments could twist emotions into weapons and pressure into wounds. You had 8 years to say something, she replied quietly, still facing the window. Why now? Because I never had access to you, he said. After graduation, you disappeared from social media. You declined invitations to alumni networks. You never came to reunions. Even your LinkedIn barely had information. You built walls so high I couldn't reach you even if I wanted to. His tone softened. And I did want to. Her breath caught. She finally turned around fully, her eyes meeting his. Why? She whispered. The honesty in his face was disarming. Because you were the one person I never forgot, he said. Not because of guilt, not because of rivalry, but because you mattered to me more than I ever admitted, more than I understood back then. Her heartbeat faltered. Adrian, I'm not asking for forgiveness, he cut in gently. I'm not asking for anything. I just want you to know the truth because you deserved to hear it years ago. Not when we're locked in a room together, but when you still believed that whatever we had, whatever tension or chemistry or connection, that it meant something. His voice was steady, but his eyes were heavy with emotion. And it did, he said. The words wrapped around her like a storm, overwhelming, unexpected, too powerful to dismiss. She looked away, needing space to breathe. But there was no space. Not here, not in this sealed office where the past pressed against the present, refusing to be ignored. I don't know what you expect me to say, she finally murmured. Say whatever you need to, he replied. Yell, walk away, stay silent. I'll accept all of it, but please don't pretend that none of this matters, not after everything we were. Maya shook her head slowly, more to clear her thoughts than to disagree. She walked to the opposite end of the room, her steps slow, controlled, but her heartbeat anything but. When she finally spoke again, her voice held both exhaustion and strength. You hurt me, she said. But I also let you become someone who had that kind of power over me. I allowed our rivalry to define too much of who I was. That's on me." Adrian blinked, surprised. "And yet," she continued, "you standing here trying to apologize, it does matter. More than I want it to, more than I'm ready to admit." Silence enveloped them again, but this time it wasn't sharp or painful. It was thick with possibility, unpredictable, unspoken, unfinished. The emergency lights shifted from red back to white for a brief second, then flickered again. Maya glanced toward the hallway as the automated voice announced a progress update. "Maintenance is working to manually override the lockdown. Estimated time, 45 minutes." 45 minutes. Nearly an hour inside this room with Adrian Hale. An hour to confront everything she had run from. An hour to decide what parts of her past she would continue carrying, and what parts she might finally put down. She inhaled slowly, gathering her courage. "Adrian," she said, her voice steadying, "we have time, and since we're stuck here, maybe I need to say some things too." He straightened as if preparing for impact, but his expression was open, ready. "Then I'll listen," he said. "What I felt back then," her words trembled into existence. "It wasn't just rivalry." Adrian's breath hitched, barely noticeable, but she saw it. "I know," he said quietly. "And maybe the confusion of that made everything worse," she continued. "Because I didn't know how to handle it, didn't know what it meant. And then the competition happened, and everything I felt twisted into anger." She crossed her arms again, not defensively this time, but protectively, shielding the vulnerable truth she had kept locked inside for years. "You weren't the only one confused," she finished softly. Adrian looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. Part hope, part regret, part something deeper and warmer. "Maya," he whispered, "I wish I had known." "Would it have changed anything?" she asked. He held her gaze. "Yes." Another pulse of silence rippled between them, and it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, terrifying, breathtaking, and uncertain. The lights flickered again. The system rebooted. But the emotional lockdown between them had already been shattered. And as Maya realized, they still had 45 minutes left in this sealed room with the one man she had spent years avoiding. Her pulse quickened not from fear this time, but from the possibility that closure wasn't the only thing waiting for them on the other side of this conversation. It might be the beginning of something neither of them had ever dared to imagine. The room felt colder as Ion stood there, his presence filling the space with a mixture of quiet authority and unresolved history. For years, Amelia had imagined what this moment would feel like, meeting him again, facing the boy who had once challenged her in every way possible, the boy who had pushed her to be better and yet had hurt her without even realizing it. But reality was far more unsettling than anything she had prepared herself for. The tension between them was not the playful rivalry of the past, nor the innocent competition of college days. It felt heavier, like a rope tied between two people who had spent years walking in opposite directions, only to suddenly be yanked back into the same orbit. Amelia could feel the years of unspoken words pressing against the walls, turning the air thick enough that she had to remind herself to breathe. She told herself she wasn't intimidated, that she wasn't the same naive girl from years ago, but her heartbeat revealed the truth. She was shaken, because Ion had always had a way of seeing right through her. He took a step closer, and Amelia instinctively stepped back, her shoulders brushing against the cold wall behind her. His eyes softened for a moment, as if recognizing the unease, but the softness vanished almost instantly, replaced by a guarded expression. It was strange, she thought, how both of them were pretending. Pretending this was just a professional misunderstanding, pretending the past didn't matter, pretending they weren't standing in front of each other with entire chapters of their lives left unspoken. Ion ran his hand through his hair, the gesture familiar enough to make her stomach twist. He always did that when he was thinking too hard or when he was uncomfortable. "I didn't expect to see you today," he finally said, his voice low, controlled, and carrying an undertone she couldn't define. Amelia didn't respond immediately. She didn't trust her voice yet, didn't trust that it wouldn't betray the storm inside her. Instead, she focused on her breathing, grounding herself, reminding herself she had every right to stand here without feeling small. When she finally spoke, her voice wasn't shaky, but it carried a firmness she hadn't expected. "You shouldn't have locked the door behind me." She watched his expression shift, surprise, then a flicker of regret, then something more complex. It wasn't intentional, he replied quickly, as if wanting to erase the discomfort. The door always shuts like that. You didn't do anything wrong. The words landed oddly. She hadn't expected him to defend her, not after how things had ended between them. He leaned against the desk, crossing his arms in a way that made him look even more frustratingly composed. You really thought I brought you here on purpose? He asked, voice softening again. Amelia, if I had wanted to talk to you, I would have found another way. She almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. Ayan Malik had always been direct, blunt even. If he wanted something, he went after it without hesitation. That was what had made him such a powerful competitor in college, and such a successful man now. But the fact that he even felt the need to explain himself told her something had changed. Silence settled between them again, but it wasn't sharp like before. This time it was heavy and contemplative. Amelia's eyes drifted to the portfolio she had dropped earlier. Papers were scattered across the floor, representing weeks of work, late nights, and her determination to rebuild her life. Ayan followed her gaze, then moved before she could stop him. He crouched down and began collecting the papers, carefully smoothing the corners, organizing them exactly how she had arranged them. She froze at the sight. Ayan Malik, the man who used to snatch her assignments in college just to annoy her, the man who used to tease her until she nearly threw books at him, was now kneeling on the floor, picking up her scattered dreams as if they mattered. The gesture shouldn't have affected her, yet it did, more deeply than she expected. When he stood up and handed the files to her, their fingers brushed for a brief second. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't electric like in the movies, but it sparked something real, something old and familiar, something neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Amelia took the papers, cleared her throat, and forced herself to meet his eyes. Thank you, she said simply, because anything more would have been too exposing. He nodded once as if accepting the small bridge she had offered, but then his expression shifted again, turning thoughtful, almost conflicted. Why didn't you tell me you were coming today? He asked quietly. The question startled her, as if he had expected her to tell him, as if he had wanted to know. Why would I? She replied, her voice calm but her heart racing. Ayan, we haven't spoken in years. I didn't even know you were involved in this project until I saw your name on the door. He exhaled slowly, and for the first time he looked genuinely affected, not annoyed, not arrogant, but disappointed. She didn't know what to do with that. I didn't think it mattered anymore, she added softly. Whatever we were in college, it was a long time ago. But Ayan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked to the window and stood there, his back to her, as if he needed the distance to process what she had said. The skyline glowed behind him, casting a silhouette that felt both powerful and achingly familiar. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost hesitant. It did matter, he said, more than you think. Amelia went still. She wasn't expecting that, not from him, not after everything, not after the years of silence and misunderstanding. Before she could ask what he meant, the lock on the door clicked, breaking the moment. The building's automated system finally reset, unlocking itself and freeing the room from its strange captivity. Ayan turned around just as Amelia reached for the doorknob. Their eyes met again, one last moment before the world outside rushed back in. She didn't know what to say. She wasn't ready to unpack the weight of his words, and he didn't try to stop her. Amelia, he said softly. She paused, hand on the door, waiting. This isn't over. The words followed her as she stepped out, echoing through her entire body with a power she hadn't anticipated. She walked down the hallway, her footsteps steady even though nothing inside her felt steady anymore. She had come here today thinking this was just another opportunity, another job, another step in rebuilding her career. But she had walked into something far more complicated, something unfinished, something emotional, something dangerous in a way she wasn't prepared for. Because Ayan Malik wasn't just a rival from her past. He was the one person who had once seen her potential before she even believed in herself. The one person who had challenged her until she became stronger. And now, fate had placed him in her path again. Whether she wanted it or not, she knew one thing with unsettling certainty. This story had only just begun. The following morning arrived with a heaviness Amelia couldn't shake, no matter how many times she tried to distract herself with her routine. She brewed her coffee the same way she always had, organized her notes, reviewed her tasks, and sat by the window to enjoy the quiet early sunlight that spilled across her apartment floor. But nothing felt normal. The echo of yesterday's encounter kept looping inside her mind. Ayan's expression, his tone, the unexpected softness in his eyes, and especially those 3 words that had followed her out of the room. This isn't over. She told herself it was nothing more than a tense professional situation, a coincidence, a temporary disruption in an otherwise predictable day. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. The past had returned with a force that unsettled her more than she wanted to admit, and no amount of logical reasoning could silence the emotional storm that had been quietly brewing inside her since she walked out of that office. She had spent years believing time had built a wall between her and everything that had happened with Ion. But yesterday proved that the wall was thinner than she thought, fragile enough to crack at the first unexpected collision. Despite her unease, Amelia forced herself to prepare for the second day of project briefings. This opportunity meant too much for her to allow personal history to interfere. She had worked too hard, survived too many setbacks, rebuilt too many broken pieces of her life to let old emotions distract her now. She chose a crisp, elegant outfit that made her feel confident, tied her hair back with precision, and gathered the folders she would need for the meeting. But even then, as she checked her reflection in the mirror, she caught herself wondering, what would Ion think when he saw her again today? The question irritated her because it reminded her of the version of herself she thought she had outgrown. The girl who used to care too much about his opinions, the girl who constantly measured her worth through their rivalry. She closed her eyes and exhaled slowly, reminding herself she wasn't that girl anymore. She was here for herself, not for him. Their past had no right to shape her present. The office lobby was quieter than usual when she arrived. Her footsteps echoed against the polished floor as she walked toward the elevators, each step steady yet carrying the faint tension that lingered from yesterday. When the elevator doors slid open, she stepped inside, relieved to find it empty. But relief was short-lived. Just before the doors could close, a hand slid between them, stopping the motion with calm precision. A familiar figure stepped in, tall, composed, carrying an air that demanded attention whether he intended it or not. Ion. He offered a polite nod, nothing more, but the silence that followed was loud enough to fill the entire elevator. Amelia kept her eyes fixed on the illuminated floor numbers, determined not to acknowledge the weight of the atmosphere. Yet she could feel him glance at her, not with hostility, not with rivalry, but with something more complex, an emotion layered with curiosity, nostalgia, and something she couldn't quite decipher. When the elevator reached their floor, they stepped out together, walking side by side through the hallway. For a moment, Amelia wondered if he would say something about yesterday, offer some explanation, try to ease the unresolved tension. But he remained quiet, his steps matching her pace with effortless synchronicity. It reminded her of the many times they had walked out of lecture halls in college, always competing, always pretending they weren't aware of each other even though everyone else could see how intertwined their paths were. Just as they reached the meeting room, Ion finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost too calm, as if he had spent hours rehearsing the right tone. "Amelia," he said, gently stopping her with a subtle gesture. She paused, surprised by the softness in his voice. "About yesterday. I want to make something clear." She waited, bracing herself for whatever explanation he felt compelled to give. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable," he continued. "I know the situation was unexpected, and I know our history may still carry weight." She swallowed hard, unsure how to respond without revealing more than she wanted. Instead, she simply nodded, offering a neutral expression that masked the swirl of emotions she didn't dare expose. Ion took a small step closer, but not enough to invade her space, just enough to signal sincerity. "I'm not here to complicate your work," he said quietly. "We're adults now, we've both changed. Whatever happened in the past, it doesn't have to define anything now." His words were reasonable, carefully chosen, maybe even responsible. But Amelia felt a tug of contradiction inside her, because the truth was, some things from the past did still matter. Some wounds, even if healed, left marks that never truly disappeared. And some people, no matter how much time passed, still carried a presence strong enough to unsettle everything. She studied his face for a moment, noticing the maturity that had replaced the boyish confidence he once had. There was a depth to his expression now, a gravity in his eyes that suggested he had lived through his own silent battles during the years they were apart. She wondered what had shaped him, what had changed him, what stories were carved into the man who stood before her now. Before she could respond, their conversation was interrupted as the rest of the project team began filing into the meeting room. Ion stepped back, allowing her to enter first. She took her seat, opened her files, and tried to fully shift into professional mode. But it was impossible to ignore the way he moved around the room, commanding yet patient, confident yet composed, offering guidance to his team without the arrogance he once carried. He wasn't the same person she remembered from college. He was something more, stronger, calmer, and strangely harder to ignore. Throughout the meeting, Amelia found herself caught between trying to pay attention to the details of the project and trying not to notice him. It was exhausting. Every time he spoke, she felt the weight of memory mixing with the unfamiliar presence of who he had become. And every time their eyes met by accident, an uncomfortable awareness passed between them, neither of them willing to acknowledge it but both undeniably affected by it. When the meeting finally ended, the project manager announced that several teams would be reorganized and subgroups would be assigned for the next phase of work. Amelia listened casually until she heard her name paired with Ion's. They were assigned to the same division, required to collaborate closely for the next 3 weeks. Her breath caught for a moment. She wasn't sure if it was shock, frustration, or something else entirely. Ion, on the other hand, remained composed, though she caught a brief flicker of something in his eyes, something that looked like concern or perhaps anticipation. As the team dispersed, he approached her again, slow and measured, giving her space to react. "It looks like we'll be working together," he said, his tone neutral but laced with meaning. Amelia held his gaze and nodded. She wasn't afraid of working with him. But she couldn't deny the truth either. Working closely with Ion Malik again meant facing feelings, memories, and unresolved history she had spent years burying. And now, fate had placed them side by side once more, not as rivals, not as enemies, but as two adults forced to confront the echoes of a story neither of them fully understood yet. Long, unique, full-paragraph continuation. The next 48 hours unfolded with a heaviness that neither Amelia nor Ion could ignore. Ever since the night in the locked conference room, ever since the moment their unresolved history collided so violently with the reality of who they had become, everything felt different. Every conversation between them now carried an unseen weight. Every shared glance felt like a question without an easy answer, and every silence seemed louder than any argument they had once had in their college years. Amelia tried to bury herself in her work, determined not to let emotions cloud her judgment. But the harder she tried to separate her thoughts from him, the more her mind seemed to drift toward the moments she couldn't forget. She replayed the way his voice softened when he spoke about the past, the way he looked at her as if he had spent years waiting to say what he never once dared to admit, and the way their anger dissolved into something dangerously close to vulnerability. A part of her wished she could simply erase it all, pretend the moment had never happened. But another part, quiet, persistent, frighteningly honest, knew that the truth had already changed something inside her. Ion, on the other hand, carried himself through the office with an unusual calm, but beneath that veneer, he was fighting his own private storm. For years, he had built a life defined by control over his responsibilities, control over his decisions, control over his emotions. It was how he survived the pressure of expectations, how he handled the weight of leadership, how he convinced himself that the mistakes of his youth no longer held power over him. But after being locked in that room with Amelia, after hearing her voice tremble with unfiltered truth, after witnessing the strength she carried even when confronting her deepest wounds, control felt impossible. He had spent years trying to forget the girl who once challenged him in every lecture hall, the girl who had unknowingly shaped the best and worst parts of who he became, the girl who made him feel ambition, frustration, admiration, and longing all at once. He believed time would erase it. But time hadn't erased anything. It had only buried it deeper, waiting for one moment, one conversation, to bring everything rushing back. Their next major project review meeting forced them into the same room once again, sitting side by side, exchanging ideas with professional composure that neither of them fully felt. Amelia spoke with the clear confidence she was known for, presenting her insights with precision and calm depth. Ion listened attentively, occasionally offering clarifications to the team, but every time Amelia's voice shifted tone or her expression changed, he felt something stir inside him, something he couldn't contain much longer. He tried to focus solely on the project, but his thoughts drifted, inevitably, to the memory that now refused to fade. The softness in her voice when she confessed she never forgot him, the way her eyes revealed a history she had spent years trying to hide, and the quiet, heartbreaking strength of someone who survived disappointment and rebuilt herself piece by piece without expecting applause. After the meeting, Amelia gathered her notes and headed for the hallway, hoping to slip away before Ion approached her. But fate, as always, had other plans. He followed her out with quiet footsteps, catching up to her by the windowed corridor overlooking the city skyline. "Amelia," he said gently, stopping her with a voice that was softer than she expected. She closed her eyes briefly before turning around, knowing that whatever he had to say wouldn't be easy to hear. "Can't keep going like this," he began, running a hand through his hair in a rare display of frustration. "This tension, this silence, it's not helping either of us." She crossed her arms and leaned against the glass wall, forcing herself to meet his gaze without wavering. What do you want to talk about, Ion? We agreed to work professionally. I'm doing that. He exhaled deeply, stepping closer, but not too close, just enough to show he wasn't afraid of honesty. You're working professionally, he said. But you're also avoiding me, and I understand why. I understand more than you think. But Amelia, avoiding the past won't change it. Pretending nothing happened won't make the feelings disappear. His words hit her harder than she expected. She wanted to tell him he was wrong, that nothing had changed, that they had simply gotten swept into an emotional moment caused by the intensity of their circumstances. But she couldn't lie, not when her heart pulsed with every memory she tried to deny. She took a long breath, steadying her voice before responding. You're right, she admitted quietly. Avoiding you doesn't erase anything, but confronting the past doesn't guarantee understanding either. We hurt each other, Ion. Maybe not deliberately, maybe not consciously, but we did. And I don't know if revisiting all that is worth it. He nodded slowly, accepting the truth in her words, yet refusing to back away. Maybe not, he said softly, but maybe understanding it is the only way to stop repeating it. His voice carried a depth she had never heard from him in college, the depth of a man who had lived enough life to recognize the cost of silence. Before she could respond, the floor manager approached them, informing the entire team that the electrical systems on their floor were malfunctioning and that several doors might temporarily lock for safety until maintenance completed their inspections. The warning should have meant nothing, a simple inconvenience. But to Amelia and Ion, whose last experience with a locked room had cracked open years of sealed history, the announcement carried an uneasy familiarity. They exchanged a brief glance, both silently acknowledging the irony. But neither expected that fate, stubborn as ever, would play its hand again in the exact same manner. Later that afternoon, as Amelia headed toward the storage section to retrieve a box of archived contracts, Ion followed behind her with a set of updated project documents. They were both absorbed in their thoughts filled with unfinished conversations and emotions that refused to settle, when the corridor lights flickered suddenly. A second later, a loud mechanical click echoed through the hallway, and the heavy door behind them swung shut with a decisive, unyielding thud. Amelia froze. Ion immediately tried the door handle, pulling with controlled urgency, but it wouldn't budge. A small red digital display beside the frame glowed with the words, "Safety lock activated, system reset in progress." The exact same message that once trapped them together before their first confrontation. They both stared at the door for a long moment, neither speaking, neither panicking, but both fully aware of what this meant. Quietly, Amelia leaned back against the nearest wall, letting the reality settle around them like slow-falling dust. Ion stepped away from the door and stood across from her, his expression unreadable yet undeniably burdened with the weight of everything unsaid. The room was larger than the last one, less claustrophobic, well lit. But emotionally, it felt just as charged, just as unsettling, just as inescapable. And as the silence stretched, the air thick with unfinished conversations, Amelia realized there was no escaping the truth anymore. Not the truth of their rivalry, not the truth of their resentment, and certainly not the truth of their connection, fragile, complicated, persistent, and impossible to deny. The moment destiny revealed its truth. In the days that followed the stormy night of revelations, Ethan found himself living in a strange duality. One part of him was still the disciplined CEO who measured success in profits, decisions, and board approvals. And the other part was a man shaken to his core by a destiny he never saw coming. He moved through his office halls with an unusual heaviness, not because of work pressure, but because the image of Layla standing in front of him. The woman from his dreams, the woman he had convinced himself was only a figment of some strange imagination, kept replaying over and over. Ethan wasn't the kind of man who trapped himself in emotional loops. He focused, he analyzed, he moved forward. But this situation cracked something deeper in him, something more human, more vulnerable, and for the first time in his life, his logical mind couldn't compete with the force of destiny. Whenever he closed his eyes, he saw her fearful eyes, her trembling hands, her quiet strength when she finally told him what she had been hiding. It made him question not only her but himself. How could he, the man who had always been in control, misread his own fate? While Ethan spiraled in silent confusion, Layla spent her days in a different kind of emotional battle. She still went to work, still organized files with her meticulous precision, still greeted people with her soft, polite voice. But inside, she felt as if the entire weight of the world pressed against her chest. She kept replaying her decision, wondering if she had shattered her future beyond repair. She had survived abandonment, poverty, loss, and judgment her entire life. But nothing terrified her more than the possibility that Ethan might react with anger, regret, or worse, cold indifference. She didn't want anything from him, not his money, not his influence, not a place in his world. All she wanted was clarity, closure, and a chance to walk away without feeling she had done something wrong. But destiny had other plans, and deep in her heart, she now realized that running away from fate only made it follow her harder. One afternoon, Ethan asked Layla to meet him in the private conference lounge on the 67th floor, an area usually reserved for international partners and high-level board meetings. The invitation alone sent a shiver of uncertainty through her. Her palms became cold, her heartbeat unsteady, and as she stepped inside the quiet room, she found Ethan standing by the massive glass window overlooking the city. He looked different, not powerful, not intimidating, but contemplative, almost fragile in a way she had never seen. When he turned to face her, she felt the air tighten between them. It wasn't anger in his eyes, it wasn't disappointment. It was something deeper, something unsure, something curious and conflicted, as if he was still trying to understand the puzzle destiny handed him. Ethan spoke softly, his voice carrying none of the sharpness she had grown used to. He told her that he had spent many nights thinking about the dream where she appeared long before he met her, the dream where she stood in a place he had never been, and yet somehow felt familiar. He admitted that he didn't know what it meant, but he knew it wasn't ordinary. Layla felt her breath catch as he confessed that meeting her in real life had shaken him more than he showed, and hearing the truth from her had changed something in him he couldn't explain. As Layla listened, tears rose in her eyes, not because of sadness, but because it was the first time someone as powerful as Ethan spoke to her with such vulnerability. She had spent most of her life fighting to be seen, not pitied, not judged, not rejected, and for the first time she felt that someone truly looked at her as a human being with a story that mattered. Ethan wasn't talking to her as an employee, and she wasn't standing there as a girl hiding her wounds. They were simply two souls standing at a crossroads destiny had chosen for them. Layla finally admitted her truth, how she had struggled, how she had survived, how she had carried her secret not out of manipulation or fear of exposure, but because she didn't think someone like him could ever understand. And to her surprise, Ethan didn't pull away. He stepped closer, his expression softening in a way she had never imagined possible. He told her he wanted to understand everything, not out of responsibility, not out of guilt, but because something inside him refused to let her go. In that moment, something shifted in the atmosphere around them. It was the kind of shift that only happens when two souls unknowingly connected long before their bodies ever met. Layla felt the pressure in her chest ease, while Ethan felt the weight of confusion lift slightly. For the first time, he didn't feel haunted by the dream, he felt guided by it. He reached out, not to take control, not to claim anything, but simply to show that he wasn't running away. Layla hesitated, her heart pounding, but when she finally allowed herself to meet his gaze, something inside her softened too. It was a fragile beginning, delicate like the first drop of rain before a storm, but meaningful enough to alter both of their paths. They didn't have all the answers yet. They didn't know what their future would look like or whether destiny was pushing them toward love, redemption, or something neither of them could name yet. But they both understood one thing: whatever this was, whatever brought them together, it wasn't ordinary. It wasn't coincidence. It was destiny working quietly, patiently, refusing to be ignored. And for the first time since the dream began haunting him, Ethan felt something he had never felt before: peace, soft, quiet, and full of possibility. The destiny they could no longer escape. In the days that followed their quiet conversation in the 67th floor lounge, both Ethan and Layla found themselves moving through life with a strange, overwhelming awareness of each other's existence, as if some invisible thread now connected them, no matter how far apart they stood within the towering walls of the company. Ethan tried to bury himself in work, drowning his mind in meetings, strategies, investor calls, and global negotiations, but not even the weight of a multinational empire could silence the undeniable pull he felt toward Layla. It wasn't love, at least not yet, but it was something stronger than curiosity, deeper than fascination. It was recognition, a recognition that the universe was pushing him toward a truth he had never prepared for. The dream that once haunted him now felt like a warning, or perhaps an invitation, whispering to him that the woman he had mistreated, underestimated, and pushed away was actually a missing piece of a destiny he never saw coming. Ethan, the man who could read people with ruthless precision, found himself unable to read the one person he needed to understand most. Layla, on the other hand, struggled with a storm of emotions that she kept hidden beneath her quiet, composed exterior. Every time she stepped inside the building, she felt the atmosphere shift, as if the marble floors and glass corridors held a memory of their last conversation, as if the lights themselves softened whenever Ethan entered the same room she was in. She moved with her usual grace, managing tasks efficiently, keeping her distance while trying not to overthink the fact that the most powerful man in the company was now watching her with a gaze that carried guilt, wonder, and something dangerously close to longing. Layla wasn't used to being noticed, much less by someone as untouchable as Ethan, and the sudden shift in his behavior left her heart tangled between fear and hope. She wanted to believe he meant well, that destiny was truly unfolding in her life for the first time, but her past, filled with broken promises, abandonment, and painful disappointments, kept her cautious. She had learned long ago that even miracles could disguise themselves as traps. One late evening, long after most employees had left, Layla stepped into the elevator, exhausted from a full day of organizing next week's executive summit. The doors were about to close when a hand suddenly stopped them, and Ethan stepped inside. The air immediately thickened. She felt her pulse quicken, but she kept her posture calm, respectful, trying not to reveal the chaos inside her chest. Ethan pressed the button for the top floor, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy, intimate, almost electric. It wasn't awkward. It was charged with unspoken questions and unresolved tension. Ethan finally exhaled and told her that the board had accepted expanding the new humanitarian initiative, a project she had quietly contributed ideas to but never received credit for. Layla blinked, surprised that he remembered, more surprised that he mentioned it to her personally. He continued, explaining with unusual sincerity that he wanted her to be part of the project team, not as an assistant, but as someone whose insight and heart were essential. Layla didn't know how to respond. She had never been offered a real place in anything meaningful. She had always been the girl in the background, the quiet worker, the forgotten presence. Now, suddenly, she was being invited into something bigger, something real. As the elevator hummed quietly, Ethan's voice softened. He confessed that he had been wrong about her, about the way he treated her, about assumptions he had made without ever giving her a chance to speak. He didn't justify his actions, he didn't hide behind pride, and he didn't pretend he had been rational. He simply admitted his humanity, something Layla had never expected from him. She felt her throat tighten, overwhelmed by the sincerity she hadn't anticipated. Ethan then confessed something even more vulnerable, that she had appeared in his dreams long before he had ever seen her face, and that the dreams had never made sense to him until now. Layla's breath caught. She felt a shiver run through her spine, fear and destiny blending into one indescribable feeling. Before she could stop herself, she asked him what exactly he felt the dream meant. Ethan hesitated, then answered quietly that he believed the universe sometimes showed us the people who would change our lives long before we understood why. Layla felt tears glisten in her eyes, but she turned her face slightly so he wouldn't see. She had spent years believing the universe had forgotten her, that she was invisible to fate itself, and now here was a man she barely knew, yet somehow knew her soul, telling her she was part of something bigger than coincidence. The elevator finally reached the top floor, but neither of them moved. They stood only a few feet apart, close enough to feel the energy between them, but far enough to know that stepping closer would change everything. Ethan spoke again, his voice almost a whisper, telling her that he didn't want her to be afraid of him anymore. Layla swallowed hard, her heart trembling at the gentleness of his tone. She told him she wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of believing in something that might break her again. Ethan's eyes softened, and for the first time he looked at her not with authority, not with curiosity, but with a quiet promise. A promise that he wouldn't let her fall alone. In that moment, something truly shifted between them, not loud, not dramatic, but deeply, powerfully real. It was the moment where destiny stopped whispering and finally spoke clearly. They weren't standing at the beginning of a romance, nor at the end of a conflict. They were standing in the delicate, fragile space where two lives touched for the first time with honesty. Ethan didn't reach for her hand. Layla didn't step back. They simply stood there, connected by silence, by truth, by fate. And for the first time since their paths crossed, neither of them felt alone. The universe had opened a door, and whether they were ready or not, their destiny had already begun.